I was at a small Eucharist service rather similar to this one a few weeks ago. There is an old priest in the congregation. The older he gets, the more radical he becomes. When it came time for the prayers of the people, there was space for the members of the congregation to offer up their own petitions. And this old priest spoke up. I pray for the families of the 3 young Muslims who were killed in North Carolina. And God, I pray for the demise of the NRA. As I left that service, a dear friend of mine was understandably upset about the prayer. He had long been a gun owner. They were passed down in his family. He was in a huff about it. I stopped him and I said, "That's the hard part for you, isn't it?" He replied, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That part of the gospel, the part in which we trust God for our security. We relinquish our fears and desires for control. It's hard for you." He responded, Yeah, it's hard. There was another time we were having a nice Sewanee evening. Some classmates and I were sitting on a porch, sipping drinks, and talking about our futures in ministry after Sewanee. I told them I wanted to serve somewhere small, probably rural, somewhere that couldn't afford a good priest. I told them I just don't end up in a super wealthy church where they have a chef on staff and bottled water with their logo on it. There was a pause, and a classmate looked at me and said, "That's the hard part of the gospel for you, isn't it? The idea that God loves the rich and the comfortable just as much as the poor and the needy." I responded, "Yeah, that's the hard part." There are some parts of the gospel that are hard for each of us. There are parts of ourselves that we'd like to be left unbaptized. How do we take seriously Jesus' command in the gospel today to love our enemies when ISIS decapitates 21 of our Coptic Christian brothers? Can we really do good to those who hurt us in the world of the suicide bomber? I mean, Jesus couldn't have been serious with this whole love your enemies thing. He liked to use hyperbole and exaggeration. Perhaps it's worth remembering that Jesus had cause to hate too. His ancestors were slaves in Egypt. Their stories included the horrors of exile and the occupation of army after army, empire after empire. If we thought about it long, we might realize that, unlike most of us, Jesus did not speak of enemies in the abstract. He thought of the soldier whose pack he was forced to carry for a mile because he was a Jew. He could recall Herod, who beheaded his cousin, John the Baptizer. Jesus would have heard the stories of revolt after revolt by his tribesmen trying to regain power against their occupiers. One such revolt ended with hundreds of zealots crucified around the time when Jesus was a boy. Can you imagine a young Jesus encountering hundreds of zealots along the road? To say Jesus was exaggerating when he said, "Love your enemies," or that he was an out-of-touch idealist, would not be accurate to his historical context, much less to the history he made. And Jesus lived for long enough, it really doesn't take long, to have known what it meant to truly dislike the people he knew well. It's hard to be around people every day. There are those that Jesus lived with in his small town, those he worshiped with regularly, his classmates, even his own family, people, some of which would have just drove him crazy. That's the thing about enemies. There are those that we hear stories about or that we see on television, and then there are those with whom we struggle each day. I am that person to some of you, and you are that person to me or another. The professor, the boss, the student, whose tone makes you feel like they don't care, not about you anyway. Your child or spouse whose lifestyle you are sure means they don't love you. The friend who won't listen. The parent that you've had to parent when you just needed a mother or a father in your life. The hard part about the gospel today is connecting the love for the enemies whose faces and hands we know well with the enemies we've never met, but who know the hum of the American drone as well as we know the song of the springtime robin. Jesus, like another Jew named Eddie Hillesum, teaches us that loving our enemies begins with those who are right in front of us. Eddie died at age 29 in Auschwitz. Her mystical journey, her encounters with God, created the compassion within her to love the person who was right in front of her. And then her love grew to her bunkmates in her part of the concentration camp, and then to the guard in her section, and then the captain of the guard, and then to the Third Reich, and then to Germany, and then to all the world. Ultimately, we have just one moral duty, she said, to reclaim large areas of peace in ourselves, more and more peace, and to reflect it towards others. And then the more peace there is in us, the more peace there will be in our troubled world.